There we go. As you just heard, this meeting is being recorded, so we will post it on the town's website and on the YouTube page. We ask that any folks joining us this evening, please turn off your audio and video when not actively participating in the discussion. For the council meeting that is beginning now, for anybody that wishes to make a comment, please feel free to use the raise hand function or chat function in Zoom. Chat is enabled so that you can message me directly if you would like to say anything or if you have any comments. If this meeting gets interrupted and we're unable to continue on with the business of the meeting, we will immediately stop the recording, stop the meeting, and I will disseminate a new link for us to join and continue and complete the meeting as scheduled. Just a reminder, a scheduling reminder, we're doing a quick town council meeting, and following that, we will adjourn and immediately start a work session to discuss the items that were sent via email.
Okay, thank you very much. Our first item, I noticed that our council president is about to arrive. Public hearing motion to consider approval of the proposed Tuesday, January 17th date for a non-binding town referendum on the question of lowering the eligible voting age to 16 in the town of Somerset. And we are joined tonight by our distinguished chair of the Board of Supervisors of Elections, Chair Sherry Binderman Khan. Could you please present the report and recommendation on this item, Madam Chair?
Yes, it's just how you described it. We are proposing that the referendum will be held on Tuesday, January 17th, 2023. We met last week, and as you all know, that this is, there's no precedent we're aware of for a non-binding referendum. So we are, following both the procedures that we use for a regular election, but we are trying to modify them to make this as easy as possible and as efficient as possible, given the fact that the town council seems to want to hold this sooner rather than later. We considered the possibility of simply adding the referendum question to the ballot for the upcoming election in May, but understood that the council would prefer for us to hold a referendum earlier. So with that in mind, we are recommending that we will have in-person voting.
Well, before you, Madam Chair, this
Yes.
first item is just on the date. The first agenda is the date. So if you have anything else,
no,
about the date,
that's it. Yeah, the only thing I would add about the date is that we considered an earlier date and just don't think it's practicable given the holidays and given that we need some preparation to create a ballot and make sure that anyone who registers wants to and give notice to the public. So January 17th, we thought was the earliest feasible date.
Okay, thank you. And could you also state what is the actual question that's going to be posed?
Well, I don't have the exact language, but it is on the subject of whether the voters are in favor or against of lowering the voting age in the town of Somerset to age 16. The current age is 18 and above.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Town Attorney, is there anything you wish to add? And may I also ask whether the council needs to vote on the actual language of the referendum? I don't think it's really a referendum. It's a non-binding. What are we supposed to call this? And I'll let you speak now.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. I think non-binding referendum is a good name. That was the name preferred by the Board of Supervisors. I had also suggested advisory referendum, or or some combination of those words, but the board liked non-binding referendum. I have nothing
This is good.
to add, Mr. Mayor, to that summary.
So
I
is,
don't think that the council needs to approve the actual language at this time, but if the council would like to, once a ballot is prepared, the Board of Supervisors could show that to the council for approval.
so it's in your view that the council needs to do is approve the date, and the board can prepare the actual
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
ballot to their, for their approval.
Yes, yeah. Unless
Okay.
the council wants to see it in advance, the council could certainly ask.
Okay.
We
Okay,
don't
thank you.
have rules on this specific process, obviously.
Okay, thank you. Council President Serco, do you have any questions?
No questions. Thank you for pulling together these options.
Thank you. Councilor Heller, do you have any questions?
Sherry, I listened to the meeting, but I wondered about the timing that it's in January. Was there any question about the date being like it's winter and, is that an issue, you think?
Yes, I do think it's an issue because the weather is more unpredictable in January. We have considered, and I'm not sure that we have finished the conversation about whether, because of the concern about possible weather issues, that we should mail a ballot to every qualified voter instead of asking them to request it, because I can imagine a situation where 2 days before the January 17th date, a snowstorm is predicted, and people that won't have given them time to request a mail-in ballot that they could also drop off at town hall. So I think we might want to consider that if we want to have the maximum number of voters participate, we might still want to consider that. We also might consider extending the voting hours if giving voters an option. But yes, I think it is a bit of a concern.
Are we, in terms of talking about the date now, can I also talk about the fact that it's 5 to 7 in person as opposed to a possible mail-in ballot? That's one of the things I know the committee discussed. I didn't know if I was allowed to speak, but I was driving anyway, so I couldn't really do anything like that because it would have been unsafe for me to raise my hand on 270, So I just listened. But I don't know if this is the proper time or not to talk about this being.
Well, perhaps we should combine these two items together.
Okay.
I'm not really sure why it was separated, but in any case, feel free to add to.
Okay,
ask.
so I have, my major concern is that one of the things the committee discussed, and I don't really know how it happened, Sherry, that you were talking about making this a mail-in election, send a ballot to every household, to every registered voter in the town, and then they would return it as they please, whether through mail or showing up at the town hall. I thought that was a great way to do this because we probably then get maximum people out to vote. I believe that if we have this election from 5 to 7 in January, we will get the least amount of people out. It's a terrible time for a family that's making dinner. It's a terrible time for people that are rushing home from work, even if people rush home from work these days, I don't know. It's just not, I think, prudent. I think we've seen in elections that mail-in ballots work. And this would be a great test run to see if this is the kind of thing we should be doing for our general elections in the future anyway.
I don't disagree with you.
I am really questioning the timing. If we're going to do this in January, I think it's got to be a mail-in ballot. If you want to do it with the general election in May and you want everybody to walk in, well, that's easier to do in May than it is in January. So our goal is to get the maximum number of voters out then I think it has to be a mail-in ballot.
I would also add that unlike in our previous elections that were, when we were operating under a state of emergency, or even last spring, we anticipate here that we will not use an outside election provider. And so the main cost to the town will probably be the postage, and we have about approximately 800 qualified voters. So the cost, that's for the council to consider, but the cost of providing a ballot by mail, a mail-in ballot to each qualified voter probably won't even come near what we had to spend on the outside providers in the past.
So I think one question related to what Councilor Heller is asking is, so the board is recommending the 17th, and you're recommending the voting hours in person are 5 to 7?
Yes, yes, but I don't think that I think that we knew that we needed to consider all of the details a little bit more in a future meeting. Because as I said, this is a first for us. And so in a conversation with one board member, we talked about possibly extending it. We have talked about maybe whether it might be wiser to mail a ballot to every voter. So the date we wanted to propose so that you could have plenty of time to consider it, and but I think the other details we still need to consider as we think this through a little bit more deeply.
So Mr. Town Attorney, should the council decide the date and the time today?
Yeah, I think that would be
It's up to the
appropriate,
council,
Mr.
right?
Mayor. I think that would be appropriate, Mr. Mayor. And the time that was selected, as I understand, and Sherry, correct me if I'm wrong, but the time was selected because we were trying to be as close as possible to our standard election procedures, because we are under the general guidance that this special election should be operated in the same manner as a regular election. So we're, following the regular election rules as close as we can.
That's right. That's why we came up with that time.
Okay, do you have any further questions?
The other thing I want to throw in a little bit different is, I'm feeling that January 17th is too soon because we need to do some education. And we are coming up we have to plan it. We're coming up to Thanksgiving, and then we're coming up to Christmas. And I really think we should push this a little more. I don't think we should be in a hurry to do something like this.
Yes.
Hold on, no.
I'm done.
Sorry, we have to go next to Councilor. So you're done with your questions?
I'm done.
Okay,
Thank you.
Council Member Kumar, do you have any questions?
I do, but I saw that Shannon had raised her hand, so I'm happy.
You're next. You're up.
Next, okay, can you hear me, by the way? I know.
Yes.
Okay. I just had a few clarifying questions. Sherry, thank you for the proposal and for all your work on this. I was just wondering, what was the thinking behind why it would take 3 months to pull this together? And I'm just curious, to be brutally honest, why wouldn't it take a couple of weeks to pull this together? Why would it take 3 months for the committee to pull this together? The second is a question to Ron and Matt. Does this have to be subject to the same? This is not technically an election. It's not even a binding referendum, as you've emphasized. Why does it have to follow the same rules and procedures as a regular election? That might be putting too much on what is effectively just an advisement that the council is seeking from the town, and maybe we can do it through an email survey. I don't know, administered by the election commission, so it's not partisan or not driven by any council member, but by the election commission. So that's the second question I had. And third, Sherry, you alluded to this, but I just wanted to get precise. What would be the total cost of the full range of options to administer this? And then Matt, I'm assuming this then comes out of our contingency budget for this fiscal year. And I don't know how we've been thinking about that. So just those three questions. Thank you.
Would you like me to go first with the questions directed to me? Well, since it was requested that the Board of Supervisors of Elections manage this, we want to do it in as careful a way as possible to make sure that as many voters, that's usually the goal of the Board of Supervisors of Elections, to make sure that as many voices are heard who want to be heard are heard. So it will involve some notice to our community. As Debbie said, we also take into consideration that it will involve as some education of the voters. And it's really hard to explain to you how long it takes to go through the voter rolls. And we are a committee of volunteers. But when we are getting to work on this, it's hours and hours and hours of combing through the voter rolls. I think we're planning to do it in a modified way, but we want to do it in a careful way to make sure that every qualified voter will receive a ballot. This will be the first time that we're creating a ballot with a question like this. And the law has changed since the last time there was an election that we didn't use an outside provider for. And so we have to create a system to make sure that there is integrity to the process. We did consider an email or Survey Monkey. We actually discussed things like that, but thought that it was not going to, there was just too much opportunity for not that we are suspect of our town voters, but if we want the process to have some integrity, we thought that we should do it in a way that was, as careful and thoughtful as possible. As I said, we did consider a date in December, but believe that if we did a date in January, that would still be enough time to allow, if the council wants to vote based on the referendum or any other information the council wants to consider, that it would still give the council time to vote and the time for a charter amendment so that 16-year-olds could vote in the upcoming election. And January was just as efficient for that as December. And for all the reasons Debbie mentioned, the holidays coming, it's just not a good time of year to get a lot of work done and focus on this. As to the cost, I think our town manager is going to look into it, but we have to provide a piece of paper for everyone, whether they come into town hall or whether a ballot is mailed to them. So I don't think that that's going to be any difference in cost. There would be the cost of the envelope to 800 voters, and I don't know what that cost is. And then, I did a quick calculation in my head, thinking that we probably get a bulk rate. So maybe it would be 50 cents per voter. So I quickly thought, well, that's about $400. So I think I may be wrong, and Matt can correct me, but I was thinking the maximum would be $1,000. Again, I may be wrong about that, but that was the thinking. And I don't know if there was another question.
It was to Ron, but before he answers that, just quickly, if I can play back what I heard from you, you need 3 months because you need to go through the voter rolls to be sure that everyone that is eligible to vote hears from you and is aware of the election, because voter rolls requires review on a periodic basis to make sure that we are reaching actual voters. People moving out of town, new people coming in. That's what I'm understanding from that. So you need that time period to do that. It's also a holiday time period, so it's not really technically 3 months. You're saying that there are, people are away. And then thirdly, I heard you say that you also have to prepare a special ballot, so to speak, so you have to design that, and that'll also take some time, and that's never happened before. So you're asking a question, so there's no precedent. And those are the main reasons for why you want this time. And then on the cost side, you're thinking no more than $1,000 to do all of this in your rough estimate. We'll hear from
Yeah,
Matt.
in my very
Yeah.
rough estimate, I would add to the reasons for delaying it a little bit is also just in this very busy time to make sure that the voters are not only aware of the election, but have time to consider the issues. And we anticipate in our role, just as we give each candidate for office an opportunity to write a piece in the Journal, we're considering what would be the most efficient way of communicating both sides to the arguments so that the voters could be as educated.
I'm pretty confident it won't be the Journal, but I appreciate your line of thinking on that. Ron, what's your response to the other question?
Sure. Yeah, and just to reiterate one small point that I don't believe you mentioned in your summary, Councilmember Kumar, the board was also looking for additional time to actually define the process because more meetings are needed by the board. They're not certain yet whether they're going to do, as Sherry said, a ballot to everyone. And if we do a ballot to everyone, we need control numbers. We need to print the return ballot as well and set up a process for reviewing those because the vendor did it last year. Okay, so the question of why does it have to be in accordance with the election rules? Can it be a survey? It could be a simple survey. I believe we discussed that at the last meeting, and I said it.
See, this is why we need everybody here at meetings.
The council, I think, wanted some formality due to the importance of the issue. And so that's why I opined it did make sense at a prior meeting for us to follow the charter and election rules as closely as we could, or to the extent we could, if we want to maintain that formality. But I mean, frankly, because we have no rules on this and it's non-binding or advisory, it could take whatever format the council wants.
Got it. So, in response to some concerns that were raised about timing and so on, we could technically do this electronically via survey sooner. We would still need time to Sherry's point to go through the electoral rolls and get all of that done properly, but there might be other options. So again, I bring that to the forefront of my for consideration by my fellow council members. Matt, do you have any thoughts on the budget? Ron, were you done? I'm sorry if I interrupted you.
Oh, no worries. I would just say I do have some experience with voting by email, and
oh yeah, go ahead.
In the HOA and condo context, it's somewhat difficult because, generally speaking, first you need to have folks identify what email is authorized. And so, you might have to set up a application form for folks to identify their email so that you can make sure you're only getting valid emails through the online survey.
Got it. They have to pre-register to participate in the survey, basically.
Right.
Because you can't have any email responding to the survey, so to speak. It has to be a pre-registered one. Okay. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that Sherry's estimate is probably about right. The caveat or the addition I would say is that when we hired the third-party vendor, they were also counting ballots for us. So they were printing, they were sending, they were providing envelopes, sending putting the stamp on the envelopes, providing a return envelope, stamps for that as well. And as I said, just in general, counting the ballots and providing those for us. And so when we did our full election, it was in the $6,000, $7,000 range altogether to do a third-party vendor to kind of do the full suite of services for us. I think if we were to just print them, as Sherry said, I think $1,000 or so, it would be one piece of paper, which is 5 cents maybe, and then depending on what we did in terms of envelopes and stamping, we would provide at least one envelope, potentially a return envelope. I think that the board was sort of going back and forth and hadn't made a concrete decision on that either way. And then, stamping as well. So I would say, $1.50, $2 per voter, and we have what, 1,000 voters or so. So
Yeah, about 800.
Estimated 800 to be confirmed with an
Yeah.
updated voter roll.
yeah, right. So yeah, I think $1,000, maybe $1,500 on the upper end would, something like that. And yes, to I think you had asked it this way, but I at this point we obviously didn't budget for a special referenda, so we would just take it out of our contingency money. We do budget $40,000 in our operating contingency, so that's not a problem.
Okay,
Is that your last question, council member?
yes, thank you.
Well, related to that question, Mr. Town Attorney, wouldn't the council need to also, when they vote on the date, also vote on transferring the funds to cover this?
That's a good point, yeah.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if the funds have not been appropriated already.
Okay, so that's another thing that you might want to consider doing tonight.
And that would be a budget amendment, correct?
Sorry?
That would be a budget amendment, correct?
Which
Because of
requires a
supermajority.
supermajority,
Thank you.
which requires a
That would be
supermajority.
Right.
Four votes in favor to amend the budget.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rovak, do you have any questions?
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I missed like the beginning part of this, but I guess I'm confused because it seems like if we want to increase turnout and get the best response and not have to do it the hardest way, we should just incorporate this as part of our election in May. Was that looked at as an option?
It certainly is an option. That's really, I would say,
You're asking.
yeah, it's an option. It would be up to the council to direct us in that way.
Yeah, I advised the Board of Supervisors that it was an option, but one that I recall, and maybe I'm mistaken, was rejected by the council because the council wanted it done soon. I think was verbiage in the motion that it happened soon and not wait to be a special election question at the May election.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, there's all of these logistics that we're talking about to try to execute this in 2 months with holidays coming up and, a potential town that doesn't know, what's going on with this election and how to do it and when to do it, and the additional budget costs associated with it. I think that, in my opinion, it makes more sense to include it as part of our regular election so that we can then help also drive more people to participate in the regular election and not have to do a budget amendment and all of these special things that we're talking about to try to pull it off in the next 2.5 months, is my opinion, but
Do you have any further questions?
no, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Town Manager, has any resident or guest indicated they wish to speak on this item?
No, not at this time. We do have a couple of residents that, take an interest in this issue that are joined with us, but
No one
I'm sort of
wishes.
stalling to see if they have any comments, but it appears that that's not the case at this time.
Okay,
Anyone
thank
who wants to comment can raise their hand or send a message to the manager in the chat function.
Okay, so council, is anyone prepared to make a motion, or do you, I see that this issue was split up into two items, but I think that honestly, because they're connected, I think it would be better if we have a discussion and presentation about the procedures before you vote. I think it'd be better if you voted on the whole package.
Okay.
Okay, so now, Madam Chair, could you please present the plans for the procedures for this election?
So I would say that subject to the council's direction, that in light of the council's direction at the last meeting, we are proposing the election date of January 17th, 2023. The way we had decided it at the last meeting would be that qualified voters would have the option of voting in person or requesting a mail-in ballot, and that voting could be in person at Town Hall between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. As I said, we are open to considering other methods of sending ballots to the voters in town. So I think the intention was that we would meet again and consider this a little bit more, but I think that at the moment, the main proposal, the formal proposal from the Board of Elections is as written in the Town Journal article, the draft that I sent to each of you, which is, as I first said.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Town Attorney, do you wish to add anything to that?
No, Mr. Mayor, I do not.
Okay, thank you. Council President Circo, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Thank you. Councilor Heller.
Yeah, it's kind of a procedural question. So if after this, we all talk and we make a motion, does the motion have to be, what says on the agenda?
No.
Or can I make a whole new motion?
Yes.
Okay, then I.
What it says on the agenda is just what
Okay.
the item is, but it's not a motion. It's just describing the item.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Kumar, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I do see someone has raised their hand. Maybe they were late in doing that. So if they want to speak,
We have a
an opportunity.
public hearing after this, so do you have any questions of the town attorney or the chair of the board?
I don't have no more questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rovak.
I have no questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Town Manager, has any resident or guest indicated they wish to speak?
Yes, Amalia Levitin has indicated that she would like to make a comment for the council's consideration. Amalia, you have the floor.
Can you please, do you have your, can you open your video? Thank you. Thank you.
I just wanted to raise the point that a lot of people said they wanted the town to be educated a bit more. And I just wanted to remind council members that there was multiple articles in the official Town Journal by different viewpoints about whether we should adopt a lowered voting age. And there's also a townwide forum earlier this summer where we had many experts who weren't trying to convince us one way or another. They're simply stating the facts and kind of how their experiences with a lowered voting age was, again, wasn't trying to sway one way or another. And I think those were two really crucial education steps that have happened in our town so far, and we shouldn't forget about them.
Thank you very much. Mr. Town Manager, has anyone else indicated they wish to speak?
No, there are no other comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to, since I'm not sure that, is anyone prepared to make a motion or?
Sort of.
Or do you want to have the council president lead the discussion?
Sweet.
Are you gonna make, go ahead.
Go ahead and make a motion.
Go ahead and make a motion, see what happens.
And Ron, you can help me clean this up, but I propose that we it's like two motions, and we might want to split it, okay? I propose that this be a mail-in election, the referendum is done by mail as opposed to showing up at the town hall, and that we move the date to the spring election.
So, Mr. Town Attorney, is that legally and technically sufficient?
It is, Mr. Mayor, but it would mean that the May election is mail-in only, which hasn't been decided yet.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Well, but the council can decide that.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
So the motion is legally and technically sufficient.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, then I can change this, then he's right.
You can change it.
I can change it to be that we change the date to the May general election, and that the voting is whatever is decided upon as the method for the town election.
So is that legally and technically sufficient, Mr. Town Attorney?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, is there a second?
I second.
Okay, is there discussion?
I just want to remind everyone to what Amalia said, that we've been at this for a while, multiple sessions. I'm not really sure why we keep meeting.
You're frozen. Oh, sorry.
You were frozen, Councilor.
Can you hear me?
Hear what you said? Okay, I think he's coming back.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm going to go off video so you can hear me without staring at me being frozen. I just wanted to say that I continue to believe, for reasons that are not clear to me, that we are holding this issue to a very much higher threshold than we have almost anything else. And it has met and surpassed the thresholds we've set. There have been hearings, there have been articles, Amalia mentioned that. We continue to dismiss the fact that there are many residents who have already weighed in and put in their support, even if it's not considered supposedly official. So it just is, demoralizing that we continue to punt this instead of acting on it. And, frankly, I'm not even sure whether we need this advisement in the first place. So I'm definitely if we're going to do it, I would rather do it soon and hear from the town. I think people have heard about it, and I'm quite confident many are ready to weigh in. And if the council members want more time to create opposition to this issue, that might be a different matter. But I think there's a lot of interest and support for it. So I would like for us to, move on this sooner rather than later. If the board needs 3 months to organize this, so be it. I wish it wasn't the case, but I think anything later would be unnecessary on this issue.
Okay, thank you. Is there further discussion on the motion?
Well, I'd like to reply to some of what Kabir was talking about. So I agree with you, Kabir, that we're holding this to a higher standard than than every other agenda item that has come to the council. And we discussed, and I think the council members were in favor of that, believe that it warrants it. I would suggest, though, in addition, that for a number of reasons, this proposal, this initiative has not followed the recent practice for other initiatives. If we look at, say, the Healthy Lawns Act, we had a town forum where we intentionally brought in pros and cons speakers. If we look at gas-powered leaf blowers, we had a committee working with the town had a formal town survey where we collected information and we had a formal count on feedback as opposed to using a private listserv. And we also had recommendations from a town committee. And this has gone around. In hindsight, I wish that our diversity committee had been engaged in this and perhaps been an advocate But we are where we are today, and with that in mind, and just thinking about the all that we're asking our Board of Elections to do, which is non-trivial for a fair number of volunteers who do so much for the town, and the desire to maximize participation in this. Although I don't like delaying this, I think it makes sense actually to wait until the next regular general election in May. Those are just my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Is there further discussion on the motion?
I mean, I agree with Steve, and I think that, I mean, this is a big deal. It's not like an email poll that goes out, like, do you support yes or no? I mean, this is a policy change that we would have to write into our code. And it, isn't something that's done across the country right now. It would be, I think that it warrants substantial thought. And I think that based on participation, I think it can help us for participation in the May election as well, to incorporate it as part of that. And I think that that's just a good idea.
We've had council
I also say,
discussion.
I think it's very positive to have more education on this. And as good as the forum was, it was one-sided only. It did not have any other experts coming in to talk about the other side, which is what I know when I listened to it, that's what I was looking for. I was looking for to hear both sides. And I think it's important for us to do that and to have that education. I don't think it's, I'm sorry that Kabir, you look at this as demoralizing, but I don't think it is. I think it's government. It's government working, I think, importantly and smartly.
Well,
That's
with
all.
all due respect, Debbie, I don't find your comments on this issue particularly credible for a variety of obvious reasons. And we've had council sessions. We've discussed it. We've had multiple council sessions on this issue. And I think that this is yet another example of us struggling to act meaningfully and decidedly. And I think this idea, Steve, that only committees originate ideas that the council consider is a bit old-fashioned and excludes members of the town. I think anyone can come up with ideas that we consider. Have to go through the gatekeeping of a committee. And I think it's kind of noteworthy that it didn't come out of a diversity and equity.
Okay, is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? All those opposed?
Nay.
Councilor Kumar, you're, okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. Now is there a motion to adjourn the town meeting?
Make a motion to
Meeting.
turn it down.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you very much. And now I will commence the open council work session and turn it over to our distinguished council president.
All right.
Mr. Mayor,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
sorry, before we get started,
First
can I
item on the
just,
work session is,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I just for clarification, can I attempt to restate what the motion and decision was for the record? So the council voted on 3-1 vote to hold a special non-binding referendum question on the regular May election date.
The town attorney can
Yeah.
clarify that.
Yes, yeah, that's mostly correct. The request or the non-binding referendum, the advisory response from voters will be received as a ballot question on the ballot for our next regularly scheduled election.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I will again turn it over to our distinguished council president to conduct the work session.
Stormwater bucket 3, we're just going to continue that discussion, allocate a little bit more time. Fortunately, we don't have Robin here, who's our liaison and subject matter expert.
Bucket expert.
He's a bucket expert.
Yeah.
But even in Robin's absence, I think we briefly touch base on this. Or I guess this is an opportunity to air questions, and then we can make sure we get those questions to Robin. So as a lead-in, you can go around and ask, are there any questions? Debbie?
I don't have questions. I did read it all, and it is, I just, I kind of rely on Robin to, really articulate it, in a meaningful way, but I thought it was okay what I read.
Thank you very much. Kabir?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My questions are the same as before that were raised by the town staff. I think they remain unanswered, and I think we had started chipping away at them last week because we kind of started on this issue towards the latter half of the hour we had budgeted. So I'm wondering if we can just pick up there. I think that was the intent today, to kind of pick up. I think it was after Doug's question in the document, to kind of go through and get those answered and get comfortable. So that would be my request, that we do that.
So we left off with the question, should decks and swimming pools be included as impervious surfaces?
May I also remind everyone that part of the purpose of this discussion is to help craft the proposal that was reduced. Remember, this item is scheduled to be considered at an upcoming council meeting. And so today at the work session, you can decide what it's going to be and when it might be. But it was introduced, I think, last month, so it needs to be voted on either in November or December. It has to be reintroduced. Is that correct, Mr. Town Attorney?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
So that's really the purpose of the agenda item for today. Just so
We have to
everyone
renew every 60 days, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry.
Okay.
We
But
can-
the whole idea was to have a work session to refine the language and then to decide whether you want to move it forward in November or whatever other procedure you decide.
Right.
Process you decide. And I believe that Council Member Barr did give his input into this so that you can
Yeah, I was
consider
gonna-
that and when you make your decision.
Yeah, I was going to say, Ron, did you look at those responses, or Doug, Matt, in updating the current draft?
So there's a red line with Robin's comments, but his comments were presented for council discussion. I did not make any edits based on his comments, until hearing from the rest of the council.
Sorry, do they respond to those questions that are already in the document, or no?
I'm sorry, can you say again?
Sorry, I'm having a bad connection. I'm very sorry. I'm saying, here's a suggestion I have. Why don't we go through the questions as per Jeffrey's guidance? There are not a lot of them. I think there's just 4 or 5 of them. And then we can see where we end up and see how we can incorporate Robin's suggestions if they correspond to those questions. I don't think it should take us more than 20 minutes to do that. And I think the first question
That
was,
sounds like a great suggestion.
yeah, should we include decks or pools in the definition of impervious surface? And I think that where we were last time was that pools serve this catchment purpose because water pools in there. And so, you know, they don't fall in the traditional definition of impervious, but I would be fine either way. I would prefer clarity, add clarity than to keep it open. I'm assuming that was what was behind Doug's question.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, Montgomery County looks at pools perhaps as permeable in some aspects. However, I would look at them as impervious because once the pool, you know, once the water gets up to the pool edge, it then just spills all out. And most pools are, you know, it won't take a long time for that water to get up to that edge to have it pour out. And then when pools are not being used in the winter, they put covers on them. And so it's not like the rain goes into those covers. Those covers just are very impermeable and they just brush the rain off. And then in addition to a pool, generally comes a impervious pool deck that goes around it, that, you know, again, is going to take away from green space, you know, depending on how you guys do a pool, but most of them have a patio aspect to it. So in my view, I view them as impervious.
Thank you, Sharon. Debbie, did you have any thoughts on pools and decks?
No, I agree with everything she said, though. You know, what concerns me most about these pools is that they do cover them. And then the water, as Dennis said, the water just goes everywhere, so we're like ground zero.
Right. So my inclination would be to include or define patios and pools as impervious surfaces. And depending on the situations at a particular building site, and there are other mitigation measures, the town can elect to give a waiver if a waiver is required, but we would want it included in the calculations.
And there is like a way to do patios where they are a little bit permeable and where you can store water underneath them. I think the mascots did that at their house because that was like one of the things where you went around and for the stormwater tour of different things that different people did. And so it can be done, but it's not, you know, you have to want to do it.
Kabir, did you have any thoughts?
And I had the same thought as Shannon on the patio deck thing. Like, do we, because there are those that can be pervious. Does that matter in the definition? Because, or right? I think pools, I tend to agree. I'm probably wise to include it in the definition, but on decks and patios, given that they could be done in a way that is impervious, that is not impervious, do we need to define it?
So what the
Qualify?
code does now, the code says impervious surfaces include, you know, the following, and there's a list. And that list includes patios currently, but
I
then,
see.
but then we say we're going to exclude surfaces designated as permeable by resolution adopted by the town council from time to time. So the council could have a freestanding resolution that says, even though we're treating patios generally as impervious surfaces, if your patio is made of permeable pavers, it'll be excluded. So maybe there's flexibility there to address the concern.
I see, and I'm saying, sorry, go ahead.
I think they should be included as impervious surfaces, which they are, but I think that should be something that people can do to offset their water. It's, you know, that's one of the choices that where they're able to decide to make their patio more permeable, and we can consider that as part of the calculations.
And I'm realizing that Doug's question wasn't patio, it was decks.
Right, yeah, and I think important there to consider, when we're talking about a deck, usually there's space between deck boards where
The
water
slats,
does
yeah,
get
that's right.
through. Maybe Doug has a recommendation there.
Is he here,
He is.
Doug?
Yeah, I think decks are pervious or permeable. Decks are permeable.
Deck is.
I think so.
You think decks are permeable?
Doug, are you able to weigh in?
Or at least they can be built
Yeah,
permeable.
yeah. My thought was that I agree with Ron that water that falls on a deck would fall between the cracks, so it would not be impervious.
So should we'll include pools but not decks for the time being? Does that work for
Well,
everyone?
a pool is a little more complicated issue. Shannon is right that if it's covered, it is probably considered impervious. But pools have vents on the side where as the water rises, they go into the vents and it's drained off. So the only water that would impact a adjacent property would be once it reaches that pool deck level, which the county has said that's usually very, very rare or insignificant, so the county doesn't count it unless it's covered.
County doesn't cover it, okay, doesn't count it unless it's covered.
But the pools are covered for more months than not, generally speaking. I mean,
I've never seen anything in the county that said if it's covered it's impervious, but logic to me would mean if it's covered, it is. Because it's not falling into the overflow vents. It is running off.
In a way, it almost works the same way that a dry well does in that sense. That it stores a certain amount of water, and once enough water comes down, it then overflows.
right.
Then should we say covered pools to qualify? Are we say, just to be clear, I understood from Doug that if it's not covered, there's an overflow mechanism that drains the water. But if it's covered, then that doesn't come into effect.
I would probably
Yes.
recommend against that because we want to make the determination at permitting. And, someone
Yeah.
could say, I'm not going
Fair
to
enough.
cover it, and then a
Fair
cover
enough.
could show
Yeah.
up the next month.
Yeah, fair enough.
What do you say? People can say.
So I would be concerned that if we had a restriction or a provision that
Oh,
said,
yeah. I think that we want, because that goes into the whole idea of how much of the land is taken up by structures
Right.
for building. And so if a pool is part of that, it's just yet another thing that, these lots are being, all the green space and trees and everything is just being taken further and further away from these lots in the build out process.
Yep.
And we have a town pool.
Right.
Funny about that.
And I agree with Shannon. I think that a pool, because it's a structure in the ground, fairly deep into the ground, just like a basement to a house. To the extent that we have subterranean water flow, and hopefully we do, although our soil isn't that great in some aspects of the town, that pool will stop it, won't allow that to happen. And I think I suspect that the Environment Committee would indicate that just having the water flow out through the overflows of the pool is not desirable for our watershed and Chesapeake Bay.
Mhm.
Although it would not directly impact the neighbors.
Do you have to have a permit to build a pool?
Yeah,
Yes.
But is that, you get that from the county, right? Do you get that from us?
No, I think you have from the county.
What is it? The town attorney or the town engineer talk about this whole issue of rules and regulation and such.
So the question is a town building permit required for a swimming pool? I believe it is, but we do not impose any substantive requirements like setbacks. But Doug will correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to pull up the code to make sure that is correct.
Aren't there also some good public policy reasons to have a little more regulation, so to speak, about swimming pools?
Yeah, I don't believe the town code does regulate pools, but it does regulate fence and wall and that surround the pool. And if there's a pool bathhouse, like an accessory structure.
Because I think that the council really needs to have some serious discussion about whether they want to make it easy or difficult to have a swimming pool, and whether the ramifications and effect on stormwater management that weren't anticipated when this code was drafted 100 years ago.
I think based on our stormwater management focus, we would want to make it difficult to have a pool. And I think that if we were to consult Ellen and Julie Greenberg, they would agree.
I think you're correct.
That's not the language I'd like to use though.
No,
Making
right,
it
that's not
easy or
difficult.
difficult. I'd rather just, what's the right thing for our stormwater management? Is it, are pools the right thing? Maybe if you have a huge lot, it might be, because then you can do all the other stormwater management things that need to be done. But if you have a postage stamp, a quarter of an acre, lot like most of us have here, then maybe it's not appropriate.
Right. And
Well,
what we're
I
saying-
do agree with Debbie on that front. And it makes me think.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we have general consensus on pools being impervious.
Yes.
So, yeah, Doug is correct. A permit is not required for a swimming pool from the town. So if we are to add swimming pool to the list of impervious surface, I will also add a provision requiring a permit to install a pool, just so we can capture the requirement for a stormwater drainage plan.
Thank you. What was the next question?
The next question is, we should have a stormwater drainage engineer take a look at the code to assess feasibility and to help us come up with a calculation for the on-site infiltration requirements. And Robin's comment was he agreed.
Is that something that you can do for us, Doug?
I've looked it over and given Rhonda and Matt my comments, and I've also been working with Matt to come up with a way of calculating the storage volume for dry wells and rain gardens on the small lots with small, let's say 150 square foot addition. So we've been working on that, but that's as far as I've done.
Is the question here to what extent we can actually accomplish on-site infiltration to the maximum extent practicable? When we say, please review this for feasibility, is it referring to that specific proposal, recommendation, or whatever?
Well, I might defer to our town manager here. As Matt aptly explained at the last meeting, he did some back of the envelope calculations and found, for example, and Matt, you said it better than I could. You want to restate it here? basically about how many stormwater drainage devices you would need on what may or may not be a typical construction project.
Yeah, and I apologize that I don't have the paper in front of me right now, so I'm kind of going off what I remember, but I believe that Doug and I had done some calculations if it was if it was a project that had a 3,000 foot disturbance on a 9,000 square foot lot, that it would require essentially 18 dry wells on site in order to store 100% of the water as we've written it currently. And
Matt, the
Yes.
implication of that, if we were reading in the current draft of this code change that we've introduced, is that in that particular instance, they would not have been able to exhaust on-site infiltration.
yeah, I think given setback limitations and just overall space available on a lot, and I used those numbers sort of as number one because it was an easy calculation, but number two because they're not unreasonable numbers in terms of what we might expect for a new home to be constructed on a lot in town, for example. And yeah, I just don't think it's feasible or realistic that somebody would put 18 dry wells on their property.
And probably impossible because, as Matt said, a dry well has to be 10 feet away from a foundation, 5 feet away from a property line, and there may be a distance from trees as well. Doug could answer better than I.
As Doug is about to weigh in, a quick clarification, Ron, then would those kinds of applications, would they then come in front of the council for a variance hearing to this specific aspect of the code?
Yes, it would, but I guess the point to make is a variance may be required for every application if there's no feasible way to comply without a variance.
I may interject. Matt, with those calculations, if that house had a flat green roof and used permeable pavers for the driveway, would there be any runoff it would have to account for?
I think I had said if there was I think I had done the subtraction if there was a permeable driveway, and it would limit it to it would reduce the number, but it would still be 11 or so dry wells. I don't know for a green roof, but I think to Ron's point, I mean, if our code requires that you put a green roof on to comply with it every time, then it might make more sense to just say we require a green roof every time instead of them either needing a variance or a green roof every single time, if that makes sense.
To follow up on what Ron said about the dry wells, they have to be 5 feet from the property line, 20 feet from a building with the foundation, with the basement, and 20 feet away from another dry well.
Does this, I don't believe we want to do this, but does this mean we need to change how we define dry wells? How we define and recommend what happens with these infiltration devices? Do we go in that direction where we change what can be done with these devices? Or what is the implication of this is saying that the code, what we are introducing here is not feasible. And so we will have, every hearing will be a variance hearing. I don't believe, I mean, I can't see them. I'm not in the room with them, but I don't think the rest of the council wants that. So where do we take this?
Yeah, I mean, I use dry wells as an example. Dry wells are listed in tier 2. We prefer environmental site design structures, but I think that the same sort of applies. Even when I was looking at a rain garden, for example, if a person put in a 300 square foot rain garden, thinking, well, okay, if they put in a patio and then they put in a rain garden that's equal size to that, it would only cover a 12th of the total water that needs to be contained on site. So I'm using dry
I guess, are you
wells.
getting your calculations from? I'm sorry.
Those
So
are
I guess my question is, in order to come up with the 11 dry wells, so like, if we're saying that someone has bought a house that has a square footage of 1,000 square feet, and that's the area that they take up on their lot right now, and then they want to tear down that house and build the exact same size house of 1,000 square feet on, and no other things, like, are we saying that then we're asking them to contain that original water from the original house?
on a new construction, we don't consider what the old house was. So it's purely based on the total square footage of the new structure. And I think the way that the new code is being presented would be not just the house, but any impervious structure, as we were discussing before about pools and decks, etc.
And that's like one of the things that, Matt's almost right. Like, if we're asking people to then account for their entire house, saying that nothing was on this land before, there is going to be such a strong calculation of the water that needs to be taken care of from that place. And so it could be a circumstance where they would need 11 dry wells, even though they can't do it or whatever, depending on how much water this took over. So that might be something that we want to look at, which is that, you're kind of grandfathered in for the water that was on the original house, and they will make steps to make that better. Because that will be taken care of probably in a better way than the original house was, but that will help us be able to not have such high numbers of runoff, and then these houses are gonna be able to do thoughtful mitigation, things in order to contain the additional runoffs.
Shannon, are you saying the starting point should be net new impervious addition, not the entire house?
I mean, it sounds like we're running into issues where we're not gonna have anything, we're gonna have variances all the time because nothing's ever gonna be okay. And so, I think that that's something that we want to consider, because if we can't, if these people cannot accommodate the water runoffs from these lots, even if you took the house back down to the exact same size, and they still then wouldn't be able to accommodate that, then maybe it's a little too hard to put in place. What do you guys think?
I think we're making this all more complicated
Yeah,
than it needs to be. We've debated this for many, many months. We've agreed on the stormwater plan. We're looking forward to getting lessons learned and feedback from developers and property owners as we proceed. And we come up with calculations. I'm going to use some calculations from University of Minnesota on rain gardens that they should absorb half a foot of water. So if you have a rain garden that is the same size as a 150 square foot patio, I don't know where somebody comes up with calculations that will almost absorb 1/12 of the water, because we're talking about a stormwater event of about 2 inches. And 2 inches is 1/3 of the 6 inches that rain garden can absorb. We can debate numbers all night long. Let's just get this onto, if you need a number, I'll give you a number. If we just need to put it in the code, let's just put it in the code and then we'll move on. That's my thought.
I don't want to
Okay.
debate numbers, but I do want to respond to the entire town team raising a question about the feasibility of this regulation and then potentially our neighbors and homeowners struggling to implement them. And so at a bare minimum, I don't know if Steve, if you have these sort of very precise calculations on how rain gardens work, maybe there's some alignment that the rest of us can get a clear recommendation, because moving forward for the sake of moving forward, I don't think is good enough, for me at least. We want to be thoughtful, we want to get it right. And this is substantial, right? We are saying, is it feasible or not? And we cannot answer that conclusively. I believe we can, by the way, but we are
but is it-
struggling to answer it.
But is it what we're talking about? Haven't we already implemented this? Like, are we just talking about additions?
We're talking about a 150 square foot addition.
Oh, yeah, then we
Right.
should just incorporate that in it.
I think it is feasible for a homeowner to mitigate so the additional water runoff from an impervious service addition of 150 square feet or more. And if it's not, they can request a waiver and explain to us why it's not. And they may have some very good reason. Maybe they have a lot of trees in that area and they don't want to take down a tree to put in some containment device. That could be a great reason. But in general, I think it's feasible. And it's certainly desirable, according to our stormwater study committee.
Steve, can you repeat that again? You're saying that unlike what Doug is saying and Matt is saying, you actually believe it is feasible.
Yes. I don't understand how a rain garden the same size as a patio, 150 square foot patio, would only hold 1/12 of the runoff from that patio.
Of not the patio of the example I gave of a 3,000 square foot home, just to be.
But we're just talking here about bucket 3, which is to extend the stormwater study code recommendations to additions of 150 square feet or more.
This particular question dealt with our new construction requirement as well.
I know
Because
for
we
a rain
can-
garden, you could probably not have a new construction of 3,000 square feet and have a rain garden handle all of it. That might be tough.
Ron, can you elaborate on what you said? Sorry.
So my comment was a stormwater drainage engineer should review this proposal for feasibility in tracking the language of the design manual, which largely addresses the quality of runoff. Are we adopting methodologies that are not directly applicable to on-site infiltration requirements and/or already implemented by the county and often found inapplicable by the county due to site conditions? Robin's point was a couple of points. Managing stormwater on-site mimicking natural woodland is the primary method of improving the quality of runoff. So stopping flooding and improving water quality are very much overlapping goals. And then he also has a comment saying it needs a stormwater engineer to complete the calculation. I am not qualified, but we will use the reduced curve number, RCN, that is detailed in the design manual rather than the curve number that the town of Chevy Chase uses, because I had supplied the town of Chevy Chase calculation for consideration. The RCN is designed to allow sites to mimic runoff from natural woodland as opposed to trying to capture all runoff. Also, we assume that all soil is hydrological soil type A, the most absorbing soil. And so, yeah, as discussed a little bit at the last meeting, we're assuming that the soil's going to perk, because if we consider the actual soil, the soil's going to let us down, was one of the comments. And so what I'm urging the council is to make sure we've got a code that staff can implement before we adopt, because I'm not sure we're there yet from a scientific standpoint, and I regret that I'm not able to provide that methodology for you.
Okay, who can? Because we do want to get there. I don't feel we need to do it as a ticking box exercise. This is a pretty major
The
update.
town
Who
of
would
Chevy
get
Chase
us?
used CAS Engineering, which are.
But every time we brought up CAS, it's been shot down because they also work with developers and
Sure,
they are not
sure.
considered unbiased. But
A couple of things I want to add. The RCN number is used usually for large drainage areas, and it's not really practical on these small 9,000 square foot lots. So using an RCN number is really not going to give you a valid number. The other thing is, and Matt mentioned it last time, the code as it's being proposed is using water quality features for water quantity storage. And that's the complicated issue, even if the soils perk. The devices that are being used, rain gardens, dry wells, only take the first flush of water, and then everything else runs off, which is not my understanding of what the town wants to do with these code revisions. So Matt and I guess, have had an issue with how do we get where you all want to go using the structures that weren't designed for that, really. I mean, the other thing is dry wells and rain gardens, because dry wells have stones in them and rain gardens have a plant medium in them, which is like topsoil, mulch, and sand and everything. You only count 40% of the volume storage, because, say, for example, a dry well with the stones, you're only counting the voids between the stones. So it's a complicated issue of method to get where the town wants to go using water quality devices. I don't know if that's confusing or clear or what, but it's
no,
an issue with Matt and I have been trying to work with.
Is there a way to get? I think the intent here is at the highest level, there's alignment, right? We want to minimize the water outflow from properties. I think we've taken a step in that direction for new construction. I think I'm just wondering, how do we, get there with recommendations that are feasible, that don't lead to multiple variances? I think that's the bottom line. And I think it's potentially possible. I'm just wondering, we probably go through a process. Again, I'd be comfortable talking to any engineer. I mean, Matt and Robin is not here, but we did talk to CAS, I think, at one point informally last year, and found them helpful on many technical fronts. So, but if there are others of that sort of expertise, it might help us. So we have shared intent, but if you're going to do it in a way that increases the administrative burden on the staff, we are back-to-back variance hearings. I'm not sure if that's prudent.
This has been a great discussion, and I realize it's almost 7 o'clock, so I think we need to try to wrap this up.
So are you prepared to move this forward to the November agenda, or what?
So that's my knowledge, we already voted to move it forward to the November agenda. We're just talking about it some more to expedite the hearing itself.
So just so that the staff will understand, so the council wishes to move forward with to consider that amendment at the November council meeting.
That's Right, I mean,
Okay,
that was
excellent.
already voted on.
Okay, excellent.
I think, I've heard it
It was introduced, but it wasn't clear that, the council wanted to consider it in November.
I
So
don't
is
think
that,
I don't think that's preset. At the same time, I don't think we want to reintroduce it. So we have some boundaries, deadlines here, and I'm just wondering whether we can get the expertise to get comfortable and confident. Can we spend some
But-
dollars to get
I
the
thought we
expertise?
That's
voted on
already
this.
done. I mean, aren't we just talking about the addition part? Are we
Yes.
talking, because isn't this already in our code?
Right, that's fine,
We're just talking about adding on.
right,
And, some houses who,
it shouldn't be a 3,000 square foot house.
yeah.
And, but I thought it was an interesting discussion about variances, and I agree that I don't want to get to a point where we're listening to variance requests for every single building project, because that would suggest that our code isn't clear enough. But I'm personally am willing to accept some period of additional variance requests as we sort through the impact of this code and we learn what is and is not.
Also,
achievable. What's the impact of the code.
I think that it's worked really well so far. I mean, I think that house on Trent came back several times and adjusted,
Mhm.
and offered up more things to help their water quality and quantity as a result of it, and then they got their permit. So, I think that if we would not have had that in place, we would have just had nothing.
okay, Mr. President, so given that the mayor sets the agenda subject to the approval of the council president, unless there's a majority of the council at this time that doesn't want us to move that forward, then we will schedule this for a vote on the November agenda.
Yes. And if there are any specific questions, as opposed to comments, specific questions, how do we change this piece of language? Or the order of assumptions, I would defer to Robin Barr.
Well, there will be the opportunity to amend, and there'll also be the opportunity for a public hearing, and so.
Okay.
So I think the important thing is that the staff publicizes all of these
All
amendments
three buckets.
and to make sure that the information is available for comment at the public hearing or in advance.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Good discussion. Next item is the RFP to hire a consultant to conduct an independent assessment of town structures. This is an idea that came out of our last work session, special work session. And I believe, Matt, can you provide a little background? Because you've been involved in this once or twice in the past, right? You have some familiarity with this? Out there?
Yeah, I haven't directly myself, but I think Ron had brought up that a couple of his clients have over the years, their concerns were specifically with McMansionization, but had done a wholesale look at structures within the municipalities to help determine kind of what was the existing norm, so to speak, and to try to contain overbuilding on lots based on what currently exists and what is able to be built on lots. And some of the things that they looked at were the setbacks, the height, impervious surface restrictions in the front yard, the rear yard, and the total lot. Ron had brought up the unique floor ratio code provision that the town of Chevy Chase employs. There's wall plane restrictions, all those things. It it would probably require an engineering firm to do a survey, to at least do a sample of homes within town to give us a sense of what other code requirements we could put into our code that might indirectly affect stormwater, but would also affect massing of houses. I don't know if that totally answers your question, but I think Ron had provided us a couple of sample reports that Chris Jakubiak had done, who was the specific person that had done the planning and the reports for Martin's Additions and the town of Chevy Chase. I also threw in to the drive today a worksheet that Ron had done a couple of years ago when we had briefly discussed this idea as well, to look at Somerset's code requirements versus some of our neighboring municipalities. And I think there's sort of a perception that Somerset has very strict requirements, but in fact, we have a pretty bare bones substantive code when it comes to what kinds of buildings can be built. And so he gave examples of fences, non-conforming structures, setbacks, heights, building coverage, accessory structures, stormwater, trees, etc. So we have a lot of options afforded to us, and it's just a question of, I think, what's existing and sort of balancing that limitation with allowing, what we think is reasonable for people to be able to build on their property. And I think I guess
So what do
just
you
one.
need from us to proceed with an RFP?
Yeah. So I think the question on the floor was, do we feel good about moving forward with this type of process? And I think the council president had suggested we could truncate it. I think these towns had done 18, 24-month processes where they had a town panel and advisory committee, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas we would perhaps just be looking for a survey and results of that survey, and then the council could take that data and then decide where to go from there.
Right, so let's see what thoughts or comments we have, Debbie?
Would this, is a little off topic, but we were talking about hiring someone who's gonna be part of the staff to look at, variances and permits and that sort of thing, no? Yes?
This is
This is like,
This is
looking at our neighborhood.
Okay, I know this is different.
Right, we're talking about
I know,
compliance.
right.
officer.
So
This would be an
would
engineer
this,
architect from.
but would we marry these, this, no?
This is usually just like one
Yeah.
time project.
One-time study, okay.
Our neighborhood as a whole,
Okay.
and like saying like, oh, the character of the neighborhood includes setbacks that are actually a little bit bigger or smaller, like, like the Chevy Chase Village, they have pretty strict codes for, it's looking at that.
This was the process that Martin's Additions and the town used.
I did look at the report from whoever, whichever group did it.
And both the town attorney and the town manager are very familiar with this. And so I think it's a very strong recommendation.
I think it's a great idea.
All right.
Camille?
Like I said, I do.
No, sorry,
Councilor Kumar had to go.
oh, we lost him.
I was gonna say that.
I think it's a great idea.
Okay, right, please proceed. Now,
So, yeah, because remember, this RFP will be prepared and then it has to be, I believe it has to be approved by the council, correct, Mr. Town Attorney?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and if monies have not been budgeted, we'll need to do a supplemental appropriation, which requires a supermajority vote.
yeah. Great, thank you, Ron. Shared stormwater infrastructure plan, stormwater study committee. What's that about?
The town manager.
Now, next item about. unfading.
We also do have Julie Greenberg here if you'd like her to introduce it, because Julie is actually the person that sent it to me. But just to set the table, you'll recall that the Stormwater Study Committee in their final report had recommended that the town look into and budget for essentially shared projects in areas of the town that were identified as part of the micro watersheds that we had a number of throughout town. And the town did include money in the FY22 budget for that. I think in essence, this is saying we'd like to move forward with this. They've thought it through and have some more specifics and would like to spend up to, I think it's $30,000 for basically a kickoff project for this. And like I said, Julie Greenberg is here, so she may want to clarify things or correct me if I misspoke.
Yes, please. It'd be great to have Julie give us a quick primer.
I'm going to stay off screen because I wasn't really, I didn't sort of prepare myself for being on screen. Basically, we need to bring you, the council, a plan that actually provides really good information on what types of installations would be productive to reduce a lot of drainage problems in the mini watershed that we have collected information on with Neil Weinstein's help. And this is the watershed that it's got about 13 homes in it. It's bounded by Essex, Warwick, and Dorset, with Warwick being at the bottom. I guess also all the way up to Surrey. So we have talked to residents. We did site visits. Often we got approval from all but one resident to visit. Many of the residents joined us when we made site visits. We've got a lot of videotapes and still photos that we've uploaded to a good database about the path that runoff takes in this mini watershed. We have preliminary plans on what installations might be effective, but we need to finalize those plans. And also, most importantly, beyond having the plans that you can review, we need to have the buy-in of those residents that they want to work collaboratively and possibly with consideration of some installations that could cross property lines in some instances, if that's the only way for them to be effective. We need to have them say, yeah, this is something I want to work on. Hopefully the nucleus of a new town committee could be formed from that group, as well as involving other people in the community. And we could then come to the town council with a very well-conceived plan that could be presented to the community as a whole, that would give people assurances that we're on the right track for a pilot project. And then obviously that would contain a budget as well as to what sort of public funding and private funding would be required to move forward. So this is the stage of putting all of the pieces together. And we want to make this successful and be a model for not only other mini watersheds in Somerset, but there's interest in this in other communities in Montgomery County, and we want this to be a model for them as well. So I'm happy to, if I missed anything, I'm happy to add more.
That's a great description. Thank you, Julie. Any questions Debbie?
No, thank you, Julie. It sounds great.
That's right, yours on here. Shannon?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that Kabir was the one who was kind of questioning a lot of this and he's not here. But I think it would be great to move forward with this and look at a proposal and see what it entails.
So what exactly is the request to be put on an agenda? Director, Chair Greenberg, Co-Chair Greenberg.
The request would be to obviously have a competitive procurement process. So to develop a proposed, request for proposal. And
Should we direct the town manager to write an RFP?
I think that would be a good next step.
Right. So it's not your anticipation that that would be for the November agenda, is that correct?
If it could be.
Yeah.
So let's see what Matt, maybe Matt and Julie can talk.
Yeah, please work directly
Yeah,
with Matt.
I can work with the committee to draft an RFP, and we can proceed the same way and present it to the council in case there were other elements that we wanted to include that the council wanted to make sure.
Sure, and I'm very happy to report that I think we've identified another organization that beyond Rain Plan that could be a viable, submit a viable bid on this. So I think, which I'm very happy about, because I think this is an area where it'd be really good to get 2 responses.
Outstanding. I think we're all really excited to move forward on this. If anything, my sense of Councilmember Kabir's reservations was that we wouldn't be able to move forward. He recognized how important stormwater management is, and just want to make sure we start spending the money that we budgeted. So this
Yeah.
is, but we want to do it sensibly. So thank you very much.
Sure, you're very welcome.
Next items, painted house numbers.
Yep, I don't know if Matt wants to introduce it or I can just run through it quickly.
Go for it, council member.
All right. Right, okay, so the Public Safety Committee has approved the council to basically what they're looking at is as far as safety, one of the concerns that keeps coming up is that house numbers are very hard to see, and it is a detriment and can cause delays for our for speed in terms of public safety. And so as part of the budget for this year, we had submitted in $5,000 to paint numbers on the curbs of the houses. And I think this is something that Somerset did maybe a couple decades ago or something. So they wanted to bring that back and kind of focus on that. And then where the places are where they can't have the curbs, it would be next to the driveway, so they're not blocked. And there's some specifications in terms of like the kind of paint and things like that to use. So that was approved by the Public Safety Committee.
Okay, so thank you. So, because I'm looking at the clock here. So, Mr. Town Manager, is this, do you have, for our procurement, how do you plan to handle this?
Yeah, I would probably just do it the same way. I think this was something that we did budget for, so this was an anticipated expense that we built into our budget. So this is just the committee formally recommending now that we go ahead with it. And so I can coordinate with the committee chair and council member Rovak to put out a bid for it.
So is this something that would be on the November agenda?
I think I think probably more realistic would be December, just to make sure that we have time to write the RFP and give at least 2 or 3 weeks for some firms to respond to it.
So I don't think, so Mr. Town Attorney, I don't think this RFP needs to be approved by the, so we can give Matt the go-ahead to get bids and then present a recommendation at upcoming meetings, is that correct?
Yes, yeah, and
Yes.
before, obviously, the contract is awarded, we'd have to figure out where the money's coming from.
Okay, so Councilor Roback, is that acceptable that we'll ask the town manager to get bids and then he'll make a recommendation hopefully by December, is that?
Yeah, and then the other thing was that we wanted to get some language of this and proper signage incorporated onto our building codes because a lot of the sites don't have the numbers on them that people can see. And then also just to establish it into the building code that we expect to see, you know, the specifications. So that can be one other element that's checked, and then therefore those houses are gonna be compliant because they're gonna have the proper.
So they're asking the council to pass an amendment to the code to address this?
Yeah,
I did have a quick question, just in terms of how we wanted to proceed with that, because it that part made it seem as though it was a requirement for residents to have their house number adequately shown so it can be seen for emergency vehicles. And I presume that it would be subject to a fine if they refuse to comply. But on the other hand, we're talking about the town doing a town-wide painting. So I just wanted to clarify whose responsibility it was if we were putting it in the town code.
So is the committee's recommendation that because I don't think we have in our code that homeowners / residents are required to display their number. Is that in the code, Mr. Town Attorney?
Not that I'm aware, Mr. Mayor, I'm looking now, I don't believe it is.
So I believe that would be something that the council would ask the an attorney to draft to then run through the legislative process. Isn't that what the committee is the chair here tonight, Mr. Town Manager?
Yeah, Chair Vaswani is here, to answer questions. Sorry to put you on the spot, Kumar.
He can clarify what the recommendation is. Mr. Chair, is that the recommendation?
Thank you. First of all, sorry I don't have my camera on. My computer's in a closet and there's no light here anyway. It was not particularly the recommendations are actually stated in that memo, which I think maybe the town attorney should take a look at, but it wasn't really our recommendations that you go back and require homes that don't have a house number. It wasn't our requirement. It wasn't our recommendation that you coerce people into displaying a house number on an existing home. It was our recommendations that you might want to remind them about the county code requirement. And it was our recommendation that you put something in the, I'm sorry.
Mr. Town Attorney, is there a county code requirement that a homeowner must display their number on their structure?
Yeah, I believe so, Mr. Mayor.
So, Mr. Chair, is there any reason why you would anyone would object to putting that in our code?
Well, that wasn't particularly our recommendation. We
Okay,
didn't
so,
discuss that. I think it's a matter of how coercive or how heavy-handed the town wants to be. Our recommendation was that you require any home undergoing a rebuild or renovation have a code compliant number on the house before you close out the permit.
okay, so that apparently is what the council would like the town attorney to draft for introduction. Thank you for the clarification.
Great. Can I talk about the patrol services?
Yes.
Okay, so, let's see, the Public Safety Committee, discussed and looked into the policing program and would like to explore the feasibility and cost of roving patrols throughout the town. With the goal of using town resources as efficiently as possible in order to maximize public safety benefits for Somerset. And so really it would be for Matt to kind of start to look into what would the cost be for the town police to patrol using their police vehicles. Because if you recall, one of the things that we learned recently was that due to collective bargaining, our officers cannot generally drive around and patrol the town unless the town pays the county for vehicle expenses. And so that was like, oh, well, kind of a light bulb that they're not really patrolling anything, our town police.
If I didn't stop, sit for now.
So, and then the other thing was maybe to look into costs of what private security would be for just nighttime patrols. And to the town manager to look into other neighborhoods and see if any of the other neighborhoods that we've kind of looked at in comparison have any stats on, whether or not crime has actually been deterred or gone down in those areas. And so really to kind of just move this forward into finding out about some different opportunities that we might have with our budget for.
Okay, well, to me, that seems to be a reasonable request to task the town manager. And in particular, I would recommend that he consider what the community of Kenwood, how they, because I think they are the closest neighboring association that has private security.
Yeah, and that's all in the document that
Oh, it's all in there.
that Kumar put together.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you, Kumar.
Okay, great.
All right. It's over. We don't have to move to end because it's just work session, so we're just done. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all, anybody out there.
Thanks, everybody.
Participating. Appreciate your engagement.
Thank you to MMC.
Thank you.
So I have a question. Is coming to meetings optional as a council
No.
person?